Why do people fear change in organizations and business?
Hi there, John. Thank you so much for having me again. It's wonderful to return to the show, and thank you for that super introduction.
You're most welcome.
So I think the reason that people fear change is because it's actually something that's hardwired in us. Kind of if we look back to our evolution, something that was a change or something that was different might have in the past signaled uncertainty, scarcity, risk, danger, and so to some extent we are hardwired to be looking out for changes, things that might be different, and naturally we are programmed to look at what are the risks associated with that. So it's not uncommon when people are faced with change that actually they may have we all have different reactions to change at different times, and change can mean any number of things, but it's not uncommon for people to be wary of change.
Yeah, because what I found in my experience is you get three categories of people when it comes to change. You have champions for change. They're up for change. They're going to be there on the spot. Let's change. They're ready for it. Then you have the silent majority, people who are paying a mortgage, for example, and they decide, I'll keep quiet, I'll keep my head down, and I'll do my work and see what happens. And then you have category three, where people fear change because they fear they're going to lose authority, they're going to become demotivated, they fear they're going to be pushed down the ladder, I suppose, or the chain of authority, and they might feel they're going to lose a lot of their work to other people, and they end up doing tick the box roles. So I think they're the people who kind of fear change most. Yeah.
And I would agree. I think we can have some natural preferences in change. There are people who naturally prefer the known to the unknown, and if things are going to change, they'll prefer gradual change. I think there are people who typically can take more of the middle road ground. They can be quite pragmatic about change, and see things, well, actually, if the analysis of this and it looks like it's going to be a good move, I'm okay with it, can move with that. And then we all know people, I'm sure, even if it's not within our own inner circles, we've certainly met people, if there's famous people that I can certainly think of who love to challenge structure and prefer quick and expansive and radical change. And that's a spectrum, of course. That's not a one box, or another. We might all move across that spectrum with different types of change. I think one of the things around change is that I think is worth noting as part of this discussion is that change is constant. It's all around. It's interesting because I had one of my corporate clients towards the end of last year ask me to do a module for their leadership team on managing change, and I had to challenge the concept of managing change. I said I could do a module on managing in change or leading in change and leading well in change, but change is automatic and it happens and it's all around, and I think how we become more aware of, you talk about these different responses, and we've talked about preferences of change, how we become more aware of our own preferences in change, and how we're dealing with it, and for others as well, so that we can choose how we respond in a more resourceful way, because it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is you have to communicate change effectively, and it has to come from the top down. There's no point pretending otherwise. When you just say to people, we're going to change, without outlining what the change is, people become adverse to change, they become wary, they become suspicious, and they start talking amongst each other. what's going to happen next. So it's important to communicate the change effectively.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
advice do you,
Communication within change is absolutely paramount. And and whilst not all change necessarily comes from the top, how we communicate and lead within that change. We take COVID, for example. That was a change that happened, not necessarily being directed from anyone in particular. How we communicate and how we lead well in change like that is really key.
yeah. So what advice do you give to your clients who are facing change to see it from a positive perspective and not to resist change?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things is to notice where our focus goes, and to remember that where we choose to focus is a choice. So we can focus on what's right or what's wrong. We can focus on where we want to go or what we're afraid of. We can focus on what we can't control or what we can control. And I think, so I think being aware of how change and how and our human response to change, actually, I think it's got to start there with a learning and appreciation and an understanding that each of us are different in our response to change, and we may respond differently at different times and to different types of change. For example, we can have a radical change that might affect us differently to a slower incremental change, or we might have a change that affects the very core of the role that we're doing or the organization that we're part of, versus something that is changing on the periphery. And so I think understanding different types of change, understanding the human response to change, which is often emotional, it's
True.
often emotional, and then looking at how not only we can understand ourselves better, but understand others better, so we can support people through change, is so vitally important.
Yeah. So this has been a very interesting conversation today about change. And what I can take away from this conversation is, first of all, often because we're human beings, change is hardwired into us, and how we react to that change process can be either very positive, or can be somewhere in the middle that's quite mute and acceptable, or people sometimes get very adverse to change. Also, we need to control how we respond to change. Don't, have outbursts in anger. Assess the situation and see what's going to happen. And then you have to decide for yourself, is this for me or is it not? Because if the change that's being proposed is not aligned to your purpose or your skill set within an organization, perhaps it's a good idea to start having a conversation around exiting that organization on good terms. But other than that, you have to accept change what it is. Also, I think it's important to have incremental change, because change is a constant in life. We have to accept that. Incremental change is a lot easier than change that's radical, because an organization has been resting on its laurels for 2 years, for too long, I should say, and people have become too comfortable within that organization, in their own comfort zones. The organization is struggling to compete against the competitors out there, and they're losing market share, and they have to radically change to survive. That type of change is much more difficult. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before I let you go there, Rachael?
Well, just a quick story, if I may share
Okay,
this,
of course, yeah.
John, and that is that I had to very, very profound changes in my career. Actually, the thing that happened was the same both times, but my response to it was very, very different. And I'm talking about redundancy. So I had a role that was made redundant from the first company that I had ever worked for. And I was absolutely gutted, really upset. And it was because of what I chose to focus on. I focused on that it was the end, that I didn't want to go, that, what had I maybe done wrong, all of these things. So where my focus was. And it was also, what I chose that situation to mean, like this was the end and I didn't want it to be the end. So it left me with a great amount of sadness, and it meant that I found it difficult to transition and start to search quickly for a new role. Then fast forward another 8 years, and my role in a different company was made redundant again. This time, my focus was on the opportunity and what this could mean and where I could go and the liberation and what it was going to give me. And I was full of excitement, and and this meant, exciting, wonderful new beginnings. It was a mark from the universe that I was on the right path. And ultimately, that was all to do with my internal focus and my dialogue. And so I think, if there was one thing to kind of leave your listeners with, it's just to be aware of what you're choosing to focus on, whatever the change is that's happening. Where is your focus and what does it mean? And recognize that you can choose to focus in other ways. And there are hundreds and hundreds of different meanings that we can attach to the events that happen to us. Is the meaning that you're attaching, is it empowering? And if you've got a meaning that's not empowering, is that even true? And just to question that.
That's great advice, Rachael. And on that note, I shall bring today's conversation to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, John.